Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleep Science. You're lying there already, even if you don't realize it yet. The room is dark, the ceiling faintly visible, the air resting on your skin like a thin blanket that refuses to decide whether it's cool or warm. Somewhere outside, the night hums. Distant traffic, a dog reconsidering its life choices, maybe a breeze that starts and stops as if it forgot why it was moving in the first place. You inhale, expecting the same old familiar comfort of nighttime air, and instead you sense something off. Not dramatic, not alarming, just different enough that your body notices before your mind does. And that, inconveniently, is where sleep problems begin. You probably won't survive this video awake, but let's pretend you're trying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Night owls, early sleepers, and I swear I'm going to bed after this. People are all welcome. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're becoming aware that the sky above you isn't just a backdrop. It's an active participant in how your night unfolds. For most of human history, the atmosphere was treated as a constant, something you breathed without thinking, slept beneath without question. Ancient civilizations tracked stars, winds, and seasons, but they assumed the air itself was steady, dependable, quietly doing its job. That assumption held for a very long time. A mainstream historical fact: in the late 18th century, scientists like Antoine Lavoisier finally identified oxygen as a distinct component of air, transforming invisible nothing into something measurable and alive with chemistry. Since then, we've learned the atmosphere isn't static at all. It's dynamic, reactive, and increasingly shaped by us. As you rest there now, your body does what it has always done at night. Core temperature begins to drop, breathing slows, muscles loosen their grip on the day. Sleep, at its biological core, is a cooling process, a gentle descent into lower energy. But the air surrounding you is part of that descent, and lately it hasn't been cooperating. Nights are holding on to warmth longer, moisture behaves differently on your skin, unknown, and the subtle pressure cues your body evolved to read are changing their tone. It's like trying to fall asleep while the thermostat keeps clearing its throat. There's a quirky tidbit here that sounds fake but isn't. Before modern climate science, some 19th century doctors blamed insomnia on bad night air, caused by stagnant atmospheres and improper ventilation. They weren't entirely wrong, just wildly underspecified. They didn't know about greenhouse gases or urban heat retention, but they sensed that when air changes, sleep follows. Even today, historians still argue whether early industrial cities experienced measurable sleep disruption from air quality alone, or whether social factors did most of the damage. Either way, the intuition is there. You feel it now as restlessness, not fear. Your mind drifts, but your body hesitates. Maybe you flip the pillow, chasing the cooler side like it owes you money. Maybe you stretch one foot out from under the blanket, conducting a tiny experiment in heat exchange. Your nervous system is listening to the atmosphere, whether you want it to or not. Pressure, temperature, and gas composition all whisper information to your brainstem, the part of you that never sleeps. Rude but necessary. The atmosphere has always influenced sleep. Seasonal changes once dictated when people went to bed, when they woke, and how long they stayed under covers. During the Little Ice Age, colder nights reportedly led to longer sleep periods in parts of Europe, with historical records noting extended first and second sleeps. That's not fringe, that's well-documented history. What's new is the speed and direction of change. Nights are warming faster than days, and the air is subtly thickening with gases that behave differently when the sun goes down. You don't consciously think, "Ah, yes, atmospheric composition," as you toss and turn. Instead, you think, "Why can't I get comfortable?" Your body notices before your thoughts catch up. It's very rude like that. One light joke for the road. Your brain is basically a night manager who refuses to file reports until something breaks. Another. Evolution gave you a finely tuned sleep system, then modern life handed it a mystery box labeled "good luck." And yes, the atmosphere is absolutely part of that box. Outside, the sky looks the same, Stars still blink, clouds still drift. But radiative cooling, the way Earth releases heat at night, works differently now. The air traps warmth longer, slows cooling, moist and subtly delays the biological signals that tell you it's safe to sink fully into sleep. This isn't about panic, it's about awareness. You're not broken, you're responsive. Your sleep isn't failing, it's negotiating. There's an ongoing scholarly debate here, and it's worth tucking under your mental pillow. Historians still argue whether modern sleep disruption is driven more by environmental change or by behavioral factors like screens and schedules. The truth, annoyingly, appears to be yes. The atmosphere sets the stage. Modern habits crank the volume. Together, they create nights that feel restless in ways people struggle to name. As you lie there, breathing in air that carries the fingerprint of a changing planet, your body does its best. It adapts, it compensates, it waits. You don't need to solve anything tonight. You're just noticing. Awareness itself begins to slow the mind, easing tension you didn't realize you were holding. The sky above you continues its quiet transformation, and you beneath it are learning how deeply connected sleep has always been to the air you breathe. Your eyelids grow heavier as the thought settles. Nothing is wrong with you. Something is changing around you. And understanding that, gently, without urgency, is the first step toward rest. You're still there, floating just above sleep, when your breathing draws a little more of the night inside you. In, out, slow, automatic. It feels the same as it always has, and yet the chemistry of that breath is quietly different from what your great-grandparents inhaled as they slept. Not enough to notice, not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to matter over hours, nights, even years. Carbon dioxide has always been part of the air. Plants breathe it in, you breathe it out. A neat little exchange that powered life long before beds existed. A mainstream historical fact: before the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric CO2 hovered around 280 parts per million for thousands of years. That stability gave human physiology a very long time to get comfortable. Your sleep systems evolved under those conditions, calibrating breathing rhythms, blood chemistry, and brain signals to a remarkably narrow range. Fast forward to now, and that number has climbed well past 400 parts per million, rising faster than anything in the deep ice core record. As you lie there, your body doesn't panic about this. It adjusts. Your brainstem monitors carbon dioxide levels constantly, thus using them as one of its primary cues to regulate breathing. CO2 isn't just waste gas, it's a signal. Slight increases can subtly change how deeply you breathe, how often you sigh, and how readily your body transitions between sleep stages. You don't wake up thinking, ah yes, elevated arterial CO2, but you might feel oddly restless or find yourself surfacing from dreams more often than you expect. Here's the strange part. Higher carbon dioxide indoors often matters more than what's outside. Bedrooms, especially well-sealed modern ones, accumulate CO2 overnight as you exhale hour after hour. A quirky tidbit that sounds like a trivia question. Some studies have found that CO2 levels in occupied bedrooms can reach concentrations comparable to crowded classrooms by morning. Congratulations, you slept in a lecture hall. No wonder your brain feels like it learned nothing. This isn't new knowledge either. In the 19th century, miners and submariners were among the first groups studied for the effects of elevated CO2 on alertness and fatigue. Reports noted headaches, shallow sleep, and grogginess long before climate change entered the conversation. Historians still argue whether those early observations were attributed correctly to carbon dioxide itself or to other factors like heat and humidity, but the physiological clues were already there, scribbled in dusty notebooks by people who really wish they were somewhere with windows. As the night deepens, your breathing naturally becomes shallower during certain sleep stages, especially REM. That's normal, but carbon dioxide levels help determine how stable that breathing remains. Slightly higher ambient CO2 can push your respiratory system to work just a bit harder, nudging your brain toward lighter sleep. Not enough to wake you fully, sleep is stubborn like that, but enough to create micro-arousals, those tiny flickers of wakefulness you never remember but that chip away at rest like a very polite woodpecker. Light joke number one, Your brain loves efficiency, so if it can practice waking up 47 times a night without telling you, it absolutely will. Number 2, you spent years mastering deep sleep, and then the air decided to change the rules. Rude. Number 3, carbon dioxide doesn't make you sleepy. It makes your sleep system slightly more anxious, which is the worst possible personality trait at bedtime. There's an ongoing scholarly debate woven through this science. Hot historians still argue whether rising atmospheric CO2 has a direct, measurable effect on population-level sleep quality, or whether it acts mostly as an amplifier of other stressors like heat, noise, and light. In other words, is CO2 the villain, or just the sidekick holding the flashlight? The answer seems to be that it's both subtle and contextual, never acting alone, always influencing the background conditions your body works within. You might notice that when air feels stuffy, sleep feels thinner. That's not imagination. Elevated CO2 can influence blood pH slightly, which in turn affects how oxygen binds to hemoglobin. Again, not dramatic. This is all millimeters of mercury and decimal points. Sleep, however, is built on fine margins. It's a house of cards that somehow stands because everything lines up just so. And tilt the table a fraction, and the structure wobbles. People have tried odd solutions over the years. There's a fringe but real history of 20th century sleep air tonics, marketed to improve rest by refreshing bedroom air with ozone or scented oxygen blends. Most were useless. Some were actively terrible ideas. The intent, though, was telling. Humans sensed that the quality of air mattered for sleep long before we could articulate why. You're part of that same lineage, cracking a window or turning on a fan, not because a study told you to, but because your body asked nicely. As you rest now, your lungs expand and contract with quiet loyalty. Your body compensates beautifully, adjusting breathing depth, heart rate, and blood flow without asking your opinion. This adaptability is the reason you're still asleep at all. And it's also why the changes can sneak up on you. Sleep disruption from atmospheric chemistry doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, one slightly lighter night at a time. You're not meant to worry about numbers while drifting off. Awareness here isn't about anxiety. It's about kindness toward yourself. If sleep feels more fragile lately, if mornings arrive with a faint fog you can't quite name, it's not a personal failure. It's biology responding to an environment in motion. The air you breathe has changed, and your ancient sleep machinery is doing its best to keep up, quietly negotiating every breath until morning comes. Your breathing slows again. In, out. The night holds you. Understanding settles in like a heavier blanket, and with it, a little more ease. You notice it most when you kick the covers off at 2:17 a.m. and annoyed but half asleep, wondering why the night feels warmer than it should. Not hot, just lingering. The kind of warmth that refuses to leave, like a guest who missed the social cue and is now rearranging your pillows. Your body is trying to do something very specific right now. Cool itself down so sleep can deepen, and the night lately has been less cooperative. A mainstream historical fact slips quietly into this moment. For as long as humans have tracked weather, nighttime temperatures, what scientists call minimums, have been expected to drop reliably after sunset. That drop is essential. It signals your circadian system that the active part of the day is over. Over the last several decades, however, minimum nighttime temperatures have been rising faster than daytime highs across much of the world. This isn't a dramatic headline, but it's a persistent trend, and it matters deeply for sleep. Your body depends on a small but meaningful decrease in core temperature to transition into and maintain deeper stages of sleep. That cooling begins at the extremities, hands, feet, skin, where heat is released into the surrounding air. When the air stays warm, that heat release slows. The signal gets muddy. Sleep still happens, but it's lighter, more fragmented, less refreshing. You don't consciously register failed thermoregulation. You just feel vaguely cheated in the morning. There's a quirky tidbit here that feels almost unfair. Even a 1 degree Celsius increase in nighttime temperature has been associated in population studies with measurable reductions in sleep duration. 1 degree. The kind of difference you'd normally solve by flipping the pillow or sticking a foot out. Historians still argue whether similar sleep disruptions occurred during past warm periods, like the medieval warm epoch, or whether modern materials, buildings, and expectations amplify the effect today. Stone walls and linen behave very differently than drywall and memory foam. You shift again, unconsciously seeking a cooler pocket of air. This instinct is ancient. Before climate control, humans slept in ways that maximized nighttime cooling. Elevated platforms, breathable fabrics, open structures. In hotter regions, afternoon naps offset shorter, lighter nighttime sleep. That pattern wasn't laziness. It was thermal strategy. Modern life, however, expects consolidated, uninterrupted night sleep regardless of conditions. Your biology didn't get that memo. Here's where the science gets especially intimate. In warmer nights don't just delay sleep onset, they interfere with slow-wave sleep, the deep, restorative kind where physical repair and memory consolidation happen. REM sleep, paradoxically, may increase with warmth, leading to more vivid dreams and more frequent awakenings. So if you've noticed more intense dream fragments lately, or that you wake feeling like you ran a mental marathon, you're not imagining things. Your brain is adapting on the fly. Light joke check-in, because you deserve one. Your body wants an ice cave. Your bedroom offers slightly toasted marshmallow. Second joke, evolution perfected sleep over 300,000 years, and then summer nights said, what if? No. Third, counting sheep doesn't work when the sheep are also sweating. There's also a social layer woven into this, where urban areas experience what's known as the heat island effect, where concrete, asphalt, and buildings absorb heat during the day and release it slowly overnight. This means cities often stay several degrees warmer at night than surrounding rural areas. Historically, this is new. Large-scale urbanization with heat-retaining materials didn't exist long enough ago for sleep biology to adapt. Historians still argue whether early industrial cities saw chronic sleep deprivation from warmer nights alone, or whether noise, crowding, and labor schedules played larger roles. Again, the answer appears to be all of the above. As you lie there, the warmth feels personal, but it's actually collective. Millions of people are having this same half-conscious conversation with their sheets at the same hour. The atmosphere is holding on to energy longer than it used to, slowing the planet's natural nighttime exhale. Radiative cooling, the process by which Earth sheds heat into space, still happens, but greenhouse gases act like a thicker blanket, especially noticeable after sunset. Your body responds by sweating a little more, increasing heart rate slightly, and hovering closer to wakefulness. None of this is dangerous, it's just inefficient. Sleep becomes shallower not because you're anxious, but because your physiology is working harder to maintain balance. Warmth keeps the nervous system just alert enough to notice itself. People have always tried strange things to sleep through warm nights. In ancient Rome, chilled water and marble floors were prized for summer sleep. In the early 20th century, some households experimented with ice air fans, literal blocks of ice placed behind electric fans to cool bedrooms. Fringe? Absolutely. Effective? Briefly, until the floor flooded. The impulse, though, was correct. Humans have always chased cooler nights. You might notice that even with air conditioning, sleep doesn't always feel the same. That's because it's not just temperature, it's the rhythm of cooling. Natural nights cool gradually, signaling sleep in a way your brain recognizes. Mechanical cooling can be abrupt, uneven, or drying, sometimes helping, sometimes confusing the system. Sleep is picky like that. Historians still argue whether future architectural design will need to prioritize nighttime cooling over daytime comfort to protect sleep health. The conversation is shifting from how do we stay cool to how do we cool at the right time. You, meanwhile, are just trying to get comfortable enough to disappear into rest. As the night stretches on, your body does what it always does: adapt. It lowers expectations, compromises, makes sleep work under imperfect conditions. You don't need to solve the climate from your mattress. Simply knowing that warmer nights are a real, measurable challenge, not a personal failing, loosens the frustration. The warmth doesn't mean danger, it means change. And even now, as the air holds on to heat a little longer than it used to, your breathing steadies, your muscles soften, and sleep, lighter perhaps, but still present, finds you anyway. You become aware of it not as heat exactly, but as weight. The air presses in just a little, and clinging to your skin instead of drifting past it. Your sheets feel different, less crisp, more involved in your personal space than you invited them to be. This is humidity doing its quiet work, and it has a very specific talent, making nights feel longer than they are. Humidity changes how your body cools itself. Sweat, which is supposed to evaporate and carry heat away, lingers instead. The moisture sits on your skin, politely refusing to do its job. Your nervous system notices immediately. Cooling slows. Sleep waits. You lie there in a state that's not fully awake, but not quite surrendered, the classic humidity limbo. A mainstream historical fact fits here neatly. Before the widespread use of air conditioning, populations in humid climates developed distinct sleep patterns. Lighter night sleep, more frequent awakenings, and cultural acceptance of midday rest. This wasn't anecdotal. It shows up in historical records, labor schedules, and even architectural design, with high ceilings and cross-ventilation prioritized to move moist air. Sleep adapted to humidity long before electricity tried to flatten those differences. What's changing now is distribution and intensity. Regions that once enjoyed dry nights are seeing higher nighttime humidity as warmer air holds more water vapor. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's physiologically relevant. Moist air slows the loss of body heat through both evaporation and convection, keeping core temperature elevated just enough to interfere with deeper sleep stages. You don't feel hot, you feel unsettled. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels like a betrayal. Humid air can actually make a room feel warmer even when the temperature is lower. That's because your body is the measuring device, not the thermostat. Historians still argue whether early meteorologists underestimated humidity's role in human comfort because instruments measured temperature far more precisely than moisture. Your skin, meanwhile, has always known better. You shift, unconsciously creating tiny air currents with your movements. This is why fans help even when they don't lower temperature. They increase evaporation by moving air across your skin. It's not about cold, it's about cooperation. Light joke break. Your fan isn't cooling the room, it's emotionally supporting your sweat. Second joke. Humidity is just air that wants a hug. Third, if sleep had a nemesis, it would be damp sheets that technically aren't wet. There's a subtle feedback loop here. When humidity disrupts sleep, stress hormones rise slightly. That increases metabolic heat production, which makes humidity feel even worse. It's not dramatic enough to wake you fully, but it's enough to fragment sleep architecture. More transitions, less depth. You wake in the morning feeling like you slept a lot but not well, which is a very specific kind of disappointment. Historically, people cope creatively. In parts of Asia, woven bamboo mats replace thick bedding during humid seasons, allowing airflow beneath the body. In the American South, sleeping porches were common in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, designed to catch breezes and escape indoor moisture. These weren't lifestyle aesthetics, they were sleep technology. One historians still argue whether the decline of such designs contributed to modern sleep complaints once air conditioning became standard and buildings sealed themselves shut. Humidity also interacts with indoor air quality. Moist air supports dust mites and mold, both of which can irritate airways at night. Even mild irritation can change breathing patterns during sleep, nudging you toward lighter stages. Again, you don't wake up thinking about mites. You wake up thinking, why am I so tired? There's a fringe but fascinating corner of sleep science that looks at how humans historically time sleep around dew formation. In agrarian societies, evening activities often ended when humidity rose and dew settled, signaling cooler, but not necessarily drier conditions. The body learned to associate certain moisture cues with rest. Modern humidity patterns are less predictable, confusing those ancient associations. As you lie there now, the air feels thick, but your body adjusts. Blood vessels near the skin dilate a bit more. Sweat glands try harder. Your brain compromises, allowing sleep to proceed even if it's not textbook perfect. This adaptability is why humans sleep in deserts, jungles, and cities alike. You're part of that resilient line. Historians still argue whether future sleep guidelines will need to include humidity ranges as prominently as temperature, acknowledging what bodies have always known. For now, you simply notice the feeling without judgment. The air is moist, the night is slow, sleep doesn't rush. It waits for conditions to become good enough. Eventually they do. Your breathing evens out. The stickiness fades into the background. It's like a sound you stop noticing once your mind lets go. The atmosphere may be heavier than it used to be, but your awareness lightens, and sleep, patient, adaptable sleep, finds its way back in. Somewhere between one dream and the next, your throat feels a little scratchy, not enough to wake you fully, just enough to tug at your breathing, like a reminder tap on the shoulder. You swallow, turn slightly, and drift on. What you're noticing, without quite knowing it, is the afterlife of daytime pollution. Ozone that hasn't quite packed up and gone home. Ozone has a reputation problem. High up in the stratosphere, it's a hero, shielding life from ultraviolet radiation. Down near the ground, it's a troublemaker, a mainstream historical fact. Ground-level ozone wasn't recognized as a major pollutant until the mid-20th century, and when cities like Los Angeles experienced eye-watering smog events that made the air feel actively hostile. Since then, regulations have reduced peak daytime levels in many places, but nighttime ozone has proven more stubborn. You might assume ozone disappears when the sun goes down. After all, sunlight helps create it. The reality is messier. Ozone formed during the day can linger into the evening, especially during warm, stagnant conditions. In some regions, chemical reactions in the dark can even regenerate small amounts overnight. By the time you're asleep, ozone levels are lower than at rush hour, but they're not zero, and your sleeping body is more sensitive than your daytime one. During sleep, your airway muscles relax. Breathing becomes slower and shallower. That makes any irritant, even a mild one, more influential. Ozone doesn't need to trigger coughing fits to matter. It can cause subtle inflammation of the airways, increasing resistance just enough to change breathing patterns. You don't wake up gasping, you just hover closer to the surface of sleep, like a swimmer who never quite dives. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly specific. Some laboratory studies have found that ozone exposure can reduce slow-wave sleep, even when subjects don't consciously feel irritated. The brain registers something the mind ignores. Historians still argue whether early urban populations experienced chronic light sleep from smog exposure or whether the effect was masked by sheer exhaustion. When you're tired enough, anything looks like deep sleep. You roll over again. Your body is good at compensating. It increases breathing effort slightly, adjusts oxygen uptake, keeps things running smoothly. But compensation costs energy, and sleep is supposed to be an energy-saving mode. When the air asks for extra work, the brain responds by staying a bit more alert, just in case. It's not anxiety, it's vigilance, the kind that kept your ancestors breathing through smoky campfires and volcanic winters. Light joke interlude, because even ozone deserves one. The atmosphere really said, "I'll protect you from space radiation, but I might lightly irritate your throat." Second, your lungs are trying to sleep and the air is whispering spoilers. Third, you never invited ozone into your bedroom, yet here it is, lingering like a bad cologne. Historically, people associated night air with illness long before ozone was identified. The concept of miasma, bad air causing disease, dominated medical thinking for centuries. While the theory was wrong about germs, it wasn't entirely wrong about air quality affecting health. Historians still argue whether fear of night air led to worse ventilation and, ironically, poorer sleep in pre-modern homes. But the concern itself came from lived experience. Some nights felt harder to breathe through. Modern buildings complicate things further. Ozone reacts readily with indoor materials, carpets, paints, cleaning products, creating secondary pollutants like aldehydes that can also irritate airways. So even if outdoor ozone levels are modest, what drifts inside can transform into a different cocktail altogether. You don't smell it, you don't see it. Your nervous system just notices. This is especially relevant for people with asthma, on allergies or sensitive airways, but even healthy sleepers aren't immune. Nighttime exposure doesn't have to be dramatic to matter. Sleep, again, is built on margins. Slight irritation leads to micro-arousals. Micro-arousals lead to lighter sleep. Lighter sleep leads to mornings that feel inexplicably off. There's an active scholarly debate here worth tucking away. Historians still argue whether modern declines in sleep quality correlate more strongly with chemical air pollutants like ozone or with physical factors like heat and noise. Many researchers suspect synergy. Pollution makes heat harder to tolerate, heat increases ozone formation, and sleep sits in the crossfire, quietly taking notes. As you breathe now, the irritation fades into the background. Your body adapts, as it always does. Inflammation doesn't spike, alarms don't ring. Sleep continues, though perhaps with a few extra turns in size along the way. This is not catastrophe. It's accumulation, a small nightly tax paid in fractions of depth. Understanding this doesn't mean lying awake worrying about the air. It means granting yourself a little grace. If some nights feel thinner, if rest doesn't sink in the way it used to, it's not because you're failing at sleep. It's because sleep is negotiating with an atmosphere that behaves differently after dark than it once did. Your breathing smooths out again. The scratchiness dissolves. The night moves on, carrying traces of the day with it. And you, remarkably adaptable you, move along too, still sleeping, still resting, even as the air quietly asks a bit more of you than it used to. You dream of stars that look slightly dimmer than you remember, as if someone turned the universe's brightness knob down just a fraction. When you surface briefly from sleep, you don't think about astronomy. You think about nothing at all. And yet above you, the atmosphere is busy rearranging how night itself behaves, filled with tiny particles that change how Earth cools after sunset. Aerosols are the catch-all name for microscopic particles suspended in the air: dust, soot, pollen, sea salt, industrial byproducts. A mainstream historical fact: scientists began systematically studying aerosols after major volcanic eruptions like Krakatoa in 1883, when global sunsets turned vividly red and nighttime temperatures behaved strangely for years. It was one of the first moments humanity realized that particles in the air could influence climate, light, and heat all at once. At night, aerosols play a subtle but important role. Some particles reflect incoming sunlight during the day, but after dark, their influence shifts. Aerosols can trap outgoing heat, interfere with radiative cooling, and change how quickly the surface releases warmth into space. The result isn't dramatic heat, it's delay. Nights cool more slowly. The air holds on to the day just a little longer, and your body feels that hesitation even through closed windows and drawn curtains. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly poetic. Heavy aerosol loads can actually make stars appear dimmer and the night sky more uniform, reducing contrast. Historians still argue whether ancient astronomers noticed long-term changes in stellar visibility tied to dust and smoke events, or whether cultural records simply filtered those nights out. Either way, humans have always linked clear skies with restful nights, even before knowing why. As you sleep, your body waits for cues: darkness, cooling, stillness. These signals tell your brain it's safe to sink deeper. When aerosols soften those cues, the message becomes slightly delayed. Slow-wave sleep arrives later. Transitions between sleep stages become more frequent. You're still asleep, but it's a lighter version, like listening to music through a wall instead of headphones. Light joke moment, gently, so you don't wake up. The night is trying to cool off and the air says, "Let's talk about this first." Second, aerosols are basically glitter for the atmosphere. Nobody asked for them, and they get everywhere. Third, you wanted a crisp night sky and instead got a very polite blur. Historically, this would have been episodic: dust storms, wildfires, volcanic eruptions, events that came and went. What's different now is persistence. In many regions, background aerosol levels stay elevated for weeks or months, especially during dry, warm seasons. That persistence changes nighttime patterns. Your sleep system evolved to handle the occasional bad night, not a long series of slightly compromised ones. There's a fascinating fringe corner of climate history that looks at volcanic winters and sleep. Accounts from the early 19th century, after the eruption of Mount Tambora, describe unusually vivid dreams and restless nights during the year without a summer. Historians still argue whether those reports reflect real sleep disruption from atmospheric particles or the psychological stress of cold, famine, and social upheaval. Sleep science rarely gets clean experiments in the real world. Aerosols also interact with clouds at night, changing how low clouds form and persist. Low clouds are especially effective at trapping heat after dark, acting like a ceiling that reflects warmth back down. This can make nights feel strangely insulated, neither hot nor cool, just stagnant. Your body notices that lack of thermal movement and keeps one foot metaphorically on the ground, reluctant to let go completely. You shift slightly, and the movement stirs the air around you. That tiny breeze across your skin feels comforting, reminding your nervous system that cooling is still possible. Fans, open windows, and even subtle air circulation help because they restore the sensation of change, something the atmosphere is currently slow to provide on its own. Historians still argue whether modern humans have lost some sensitivity to night sky cues that once regulated sleep naturally, or whether our biology remains finely tuned but increasingly overridden. Either way, the environment and the body are in constant conversation. When the sky holds on to particles, the body holds on to alertness. And yet, you continue sleeping. That's the remarkable part. Even with dimmer stars, slower cooling, and air that lingers instead of clearing, your brain finds ways to rest. It stitches together enough deep moments to repair tissue, enough dreaming to process memory. Sleep may be thinner, but it's resilient. As the night moves on, some particles settle, others drift away, and the sky very gradually clears its throat. Cooling resumes slowly. Your body responds in kind, easing deeper as the cues finally align. When you don't know any of this is happening, you just feel a subtle release, a sense that the night is finally doing what it's supposed to do. And so you drift, still connected to the sky above, even when you can't see it, resting beneath an atmosphere that's changing its texture, its timing, and its quiet influence on how deeply you sleep. You wake for a moment to a sound that isn't really a sound, more like a pressure in the air, a sense that something outside has shifted. No thunder, no wind against the window, just a subtle change that makes your body stir before your mind can explain why. This is the jet stream at work, far above you, rearranging the night in ways you feel but never see. The jet stream is a fast-moving river of air high in the atmosphere, steering weather systems across continents. A mainstream historical fact, it was first systematically mapped during World War II when pilots noticed powerful winds that dramatically altered flight times. Since then, it's become one of the central players in meteorology, and lately it's been behaving a little differently. Slower, wavier, more prone to sudden shifts. As the Arctic warms faster than lower latitudes, the temperature contrast that once kept the jet stream tight and predictable weakens. The result is a wobblier pattern with deep loops that linger. Weather stalls. Conditions swing. One night is unseasonably warm, the next abruptly cool. Your sleep system, which loves consistency, finds itself constantly recalibrating. You feel this not as weather trivia, but as unease. Sudden changes in temperature, wind, and pressure are registered by the body as uncertainty. The brain evolved to treat environmental instability as a cue for vigilance. If the world can't make up its mind, maybe you shouldn't fully let go. So sleep becomes lighter, quicker to wake, easier to interrupt. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost conspiratorial. Some studies suggest that rapid weather changes can influence dream content, increasing reports of chaotic or emotionally charged dreams. Historians still argue whether ancient dream interpretation traditions took atmospheric instability into account, or whether people simply blame the gods when sleep felt strange. Either way, humans have long linked restless nights with unsettled skies. Light joke moment, softly delivered, the jet stream is basically the atmosphere's mood ring. Second, your brain wants a stable bedtime routine, and the planet said, no, surprise. Third, even the weather can't decide what it's doing, and you're supposed to sleep through it. The jet stream doesn't act alone. Its shifts influence storm tracks, cloud cover, and humidity, stacking changes on top of one another. A warm, moist air mass might linger for days, followed by a sharp front that clears everything out overnight. Each transition brings sensory signals, pressure changes, wind noise, temperature swings that your body tracks unconsciously. Historically, humans noticed these patterns without naming them. Farmers timed planting and rest around persistent weather regimes. Sailors read the sky for signs of stable winds. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial societies experienced fewer sleep disruptions because weather patterns were more predictable, or whether people simply adapted expectations to variability. Modern life, with its fixed schedules and climate-controlled interiors, leaves less room for adaptation. You turn over, the mattress sighing beneath you. Your body is busy adjusting blood flow, skin temperature, and breathing in response to the shifting environment. None of this reaches conscious awareness, but it all costs energy. Sleep remains possible, but it's less efficient, like charging a phone with a cable that keeps slipping. There's also a psychological layer, even if you don't feel anxious. News alerts about extreme weather, subtle cues from seasonal weirdness, the sense that nights don't behave the way they used to. These all prime the nervous system. Historians still argue whether collective awareness of climate instability itself contributes to sleep disturbance, or whether the effect is purely physiological. The mind and body, annoyingly, refuse to be separated. As the jet stream shifts, storms may arrive at odd hours, sometimes in the middle of the night. Even distant thunder or changing wind patterns can keep the brain in a half-listening mode. This doesn't mean you're afraid. It means your sensory systems are doing their job, keeping tabs on a world that feels slightly less predictable. And yet, predictability returns in small ways. Your breathing finds a rhythm. The mattress supports you the same way it always has. The room remains familiar, even if the sky outside is improvising. Sleep anchors itself to what it can trust. The jet stream continues its long, looping path overhead, indifferent to your bedtime. Weather systems slide and stall. Pressure rises, falls. None of this is personal. Your body responds not with panic, but with adaptation, refining its ability to rest under changing conditions. Eventually, the atmosphere settles into a temporary agreement with itself. The night grows quieter. Your nervous system relaxes its watch just enough. Sleep deepens again. Not perfect, not uninterrupted, but sufficient. Beneath a restless sky, you rest anyway. Proof that even when the planet's patterns grow jittery, your capacity to sleep, though challenged, endures. You feel it before you think it. A dull pressure behind the eyes, a heaviness in the joints, the sense that your body is slightly out of tune with itself, like an instrument that needs a gentle twist of the peg. Nothing hurts enough to wake you fully, but something is asking for attention. The air, once again, is changing, this time in weight rather than warmth. Barometric pressure is simply the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on you. A mainstream historical fact. Long before modern instruments, people noticed that falling pressure often preceded storms, while rising pressure brought clear skies. Sailors, farmers, and even physicians tracked these shifts, convinced they affected bodies as much as weather. They weren't imagining it. Your body is filled with pressure-sensitive spaces, sinuses, middle ears, joints, even blood vessels. When atmospheric pressure changes rapidly, those spaces adjust at different speeds. During the day, you move, swallow, stretch, and distract yourself. At night, stillness makes these sensations more noticeable. The brain, tuned for survival, interprets sudden internal changes as signals worth monitoring. So it keeps one eye open, metaphorically speaking. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly validating. Some 18th century doctors kept detailed weather journals alongside patients' sleep logs, convinced that pressure changes triggered insomnia, headaches, and vivid dreams. Historians still argue whether those correlations were medically sound or simply early pattern seeking. But modern research suggests there really is a link between rapid pressure drops and sleep disturbance in sensitive individuals. You shift positions, trying to find a posture where the pressure feeling eases. This instinct is ancient. Movement helps equalize internal pressures, relieving discomfort just enough for sleep to continue. But when pressure keeps changing outside, the body has to repeat the process again and again. Each adjustment nudges you closer to wakefulness, even if you never cross the line fully. Light joke time, very gently. Your joints are basically weather apps now. Second, the atmosphere weighs millions of tons, and tonight it decided to fidget. Third, you wanted deep sleep and instead got a live demo of fluid dynamics. Pressure changes also influence the autonomic nervous system. Rapid drops can activate stress responses, increasing heart rate and blood pressure slightly. Not enough to cause alarm, just enough to make deep relaxation harder to sustain. This is why some people report sleeping better under stable high-pressure systems, when the air feels settled and the night behaves itself. Historically, stable pressure often coincided with predictable weather, which allowed routines to form. Historians still argue whether humans slept more soundly during long stretches of stable climate in the past, or whether variability was simply accepted as normal. What's different now is the frequency of abrupt swings, as shifting weather patterns bring faster transitions from one system to another. You may notice that dreams during pressure changes feel more fragmented or intense. There's evidence suggesting that sensory discomfort, even mild, can bleed into dream content. A tight head becomes a confusing dream. A heavy chest becomes a dream of swimming or flying badly. Your brain is a poet like that, translating sensation into story. There's also a social memory embedded here. Phrases like, feeling under the weather exist for a reason. Long before scientific explanations, people recognized that atmospheric conditions could shape mood, energy, and rest. Sleep was never separate from the sky. It just didn't have numbers attached to it yet. As you lie there, the pressure sensation ebbs and flows. Your body adjusts blood vessel diameter, fluid balance, and breathing rhythm without asking permission. These processes are quiet, automatic, and slightly disruptive to deep sleep, but they keep you safe. Vigilance in this context is care. Historians still argue whether future sleep research will need to incorporate real-time atmospheric pressure data to fully explain night-to-night variability. For now, individuals just know that some nights feel heavier than others, even when nothing obvious is wrong. Gradually, the pressure stabilizes. The storm system moves on or settles in. Your body notices the pause, the return of equilibrium. Muscles soften, the faint ache recedes. Sleep deepens again, finding its footing on a more stable foundation. You don't wake remembering the pressure change. You wake remembering only that sleep came in waves, some deeper than others. And that's okay. Your body has been negotiating with the weight of the sky all night long, and it's remarkably good at reaching compromise. Even before the rain arrives, your body seems to know. There's a hum in the distance, barely audible, more felt than heard. The night doesn't feel dangerous, just alert, like something is pacing outside your door, not knocking, but not leaving either. This is what more frequent nighttime storms do best. They keep the nervous system half awake, listening for cues that may or may not matter. A mainstream historical fact sets the backdrop here. For most of recorded history, storms followed fairly regular seasonal patterns. Thunderstorms clustered in warmer months, frontal systems marched through with recognizable timing, and long stretches of quiet nights were common between events. In many regions today, storms are becoming more frequent, more intense, and increasingly nocturnal. Warmer air holds more moisture, and that energy doesn't politely shut down at sunset. Your sleeping brain treats storms as information. Rain itself can be soothing, steady, rhythmic, predictable, but storms rarely arrive alone. They bring wind shifts, pressure changes, lightning flashes, and low-frequency thunder that travels through walls and mattresses alike. Even if you sleep through them consciously, your sensory systems stay engaged, monitoring the environment the way they evolved to do. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds almost mythical. Some animals alter their sleep patterns hours before storms arrive, responding to pressure changes and electromagnetic cues humans barely register. Historians still argue whether humans once shared more of this sensitivity or whether we simply lost awareness as artificial shelter and lighting distanced us from the night. Either way, something in you still perks up when the sky gets restless. You might notice more partial awakenings on stormy nights. A rollover, a sigh, a moment of listening. These are not failures of sleep. They're micro-checks. The brain asking, all good? And answering itself quickly enough that you don't remember the question. The problem isn't any single storm, it's frequency. When nights are repeatedly interrupted by atmospheric drama, sleep loses its sense of safety and continuity. Light joke interlude. Quietly delivered, your brain is convinced thunder is a plot twist. Second, storms don't want to wake you up. They just can't whisper. Third, you wanted white noise, not a cinematic sound design. Historically, storms shaped nighttime behavior. In agrarian societies, people often slept more lightly during storm seasons, prepared to respond to flooding, fire, or livestock distress. This wasn't anxiety, it was adaptive vigilance. Historians still argue whether such seasonal light sleep carried long-term health costs or whether it was balanced by deeper rest during calmer periods. Modern storm patterns, however, compress that vigilance into longer stretches without relief. Lightning plays a particular role. Even with curtains closed, sudden flashes can penetrate the visual system, triggering brief cortical activation. You don't wake fully, but sleep stages shift. REM sleep, which is more sensitive to sensory input, may fragment. That can lead to vivid dreams that feel unfinished, like waking up in the middle of a sentence. Sound matters too, but not just volume. Low-frequency thunder travels far and penetrates buildings easily, stimulating the vestibular and auditory systems in ways high-pitched sounds don't. Your body reads this as environmental movement, not just noise. It's why distant thunder can feel more unsettling than a loud but predictable fan. There's a fringe but fascinating area of research looking at how repeated nighttime storms affect baseline stress levels, even when people report sleeping through them. The idea is that unconscious vigilance accumulates. Historians still argue whether communities living in storm-prone regions historically developed different sleep architectures, shorter cycles, quicker returns to sleep, compared to those in more stable climates. You adjust your position again, pulling the blanket closer, seeking containment. This is another ancient response. Enclosure signals safety. Even now, many people sleep better with a bit of weight or pressure, especially during environmental uncertainty. Your body is excellent at finding comfort cues when the outside world feels unpredictable. There's also the matter of anticipation. When storms become frequent, the brain learns to expect interruption. That expectation alone can lighten sleep, keeping thresholds lower. You may not be anxious, but your nervous system is prepared. Preparedness, unfortunately, doesn't pair well with deep rest. Historians still argue whether modern forecasting, knowing storms are coming, improves sleep by reducing uncertainty or worsens it by priming vigilance. The answer seems to vary by person. Some rest easier knowing what's ahead. Others lie awake listening for the first sign that the forecast was right. As the storm passes overhead, rain tapping, wind shifting, the night remains active. But gradually intensity fades. The thunder moves farther away. The air cools slightly, washed and rearranged. Your body notices the de-escalation and responds in kind. Heart rate slows. Muscles release their watch. Sleep deepens in the storm's aftermath. This is a common pattern. Lighter sleep during disturbance, followed by heavier rest once stability returns. The problem arises when storms overlap, which when recovery nights are rare, then sleep becomes a patchwork rather than a fabric. For now, though, the sky quiets. The whispers of thunder become memory. You breathe more deeply, reassured by the return of relative calm. Even in a world with more frequent nighttime storms, your body still knows how to rest when given the chance. The night doesn't have to be perfectly quiet to hold you. It just has to settle long enough for your nervous system to believe it's safe. And tonight, at least for now, it does. You don't smell it at first. That's the unsettling part. The air looks the same, the room feels familiar, and yet your chest works just a little harder than usual. Breathing is still easy, just not effortless. Wildfire smoke has a way of arriving quietly, slipping indoors long after the flames themselves are nowhere near your window. A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. Large wildfires have always existed, shaping ecosystems for millions of years. What's new is their scale, frequency, and duration near human settlements. Over the past few decades, wildfire seasons in many parts of the world have grown longer and more intense, producing smoke that travels hundreds or even thousands of miles. By the time it reaches you, it's no longer dramatic. just persistent. Smoke is a complex mixture of fine particles and gases, many small enough to bypass your nose's usual defenses and settle deep in the lungs. During the day, your body copes through movement and conscious adjustment. At night, when breathing slows and airway muscles relax, those particles have a greater influence. You don't cough yourself awake. You simply don't sink as deeply. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds counterintuitive. Wildfire smoke can affect sleep quality even when indoor air looks clear and smells neutral. The most problematic particles, known as PM 2.5, are far too small to see. Historians still argue whether pre-modern societies recognized smoke's lingering effects on sleep after large regional fires, or whether exhaustion simply masked the disruption. Written records mention heavy nights and unrestful rest, but rarely name smoke outright. You turn slightly, maybe take a deeper breath. Your body responds by increasing respiratory effort just a fraction. Oxygen exchange still works fine, but inflammation, very mild, very quiet, nudges the nervous system toward alertness. Sleep becomes shallower, more easily interrupted by internal signals like breathing effort or heart rhythm. Light joke moment. A gently slipped in. You closed the windows and the smoke said, "That's adorable." Second, your lungs are basically night shift employees dealing with invisible paperwork. Third, you wanted forest vibes, not the full combustion experience. Historically, smoke exposure was episodic. Campfires, hearths, seasonal burns. People expected it, adapted to it, and often slept in structures designed to vent smoke upward and outward. Modern buildings, by contrast, are designed to be airtight for energy efficiency. That's great for temperature control, less great when the outside air is carrying fine particles that infiltrate anyway and then linger. Historians still argue whether this architectural shift has unintentionally increased nighttime exposure during smoke events. There's also the psychological layer, even if you don't feel afraid. Smoke carries meaning. It signals danger, displacement, loss, even when none of that is immediately present. Your brain doesn't need conscious fear to register those associations. A faint haze outside, a reddish sunset earlier in the evening, a news headline you scrolled past hours ago, all of it primes the nervous system. Sleep, once again, becomes lighter not because you're worried, but because vigilance has been quietly requested. Wildfire smoke also interacts with other nighttime factors. It often coincides with heat, stagnation, and low wind, conditions that already make sleep harder. Together, they create an environment where the body works overtime to maintain balance. More effort to breathe, more effort to cool, more effort to relax. None of it dramatic, all of it cumulative. There's a fringe but fascinating line of inquiry into how repeated smoke exposure affects dream content. Some preliminary observations suggest an increase in dreams involving confinement, fog, or difficulty moving. Historians still argue whether similar themes appeared in historical accounts after large fires, or whether modern dream analysis simply gives us new language for old experiences. Either way, the sleeping brain tells stories about the body's sensations. You might wake in the morning with a dry throat, slightly heavy chest, or a headache that feels like poor sleep rather than illness. That distinction matters. Your body isn't sick, it's been compensating. Compensation, unfortunately, doesn't feel restful. People adapt in small, intuitive ways. You might run an air purifier, use a fan to circulate filtered air, monitor or close off certain rooms. These actions help not because they make conditions perfect, but because they restore a sense of agency. Sleep improves when the nervous system believes something is being done. Historians still argue whether future public health guidance will treat sleep disruption from wildfire smoke as a primary effect rather than a side note. Traditionally, concern focused on lungs and hearts during the day. Now, researchers are realizing that nights matter just as much. Sleep loss amplifies inflammation, stress responses, and fatigue, the very things smoke already nudges. As you lie there, the particles continue to drift, settle, and eventually move on. Wildfire smoke rarely stays forever, even if it overstays its welcome. Your body, resilient as ever, adjusts breathing depth, redistributes blood flow, and stitches together enough rest to function. You don't need to monitor air quality numbers tonight. You don't need to solve regional fire management from your pillow. Simply understanding that smoke can thin sleep without fully breaking it loosens the frustration. Some nights are for deep restoration, others are for maintenance. Your breathing steadies again. The room feels contained, protected, familiar. Even when the outside world burns and smolders, you are allowed to rest. Sleep may come in lighter layers tonight, but it still comes. And that, under smoky skies, is no small thing. You sense it even with the windows closed. The night outside cools, but the room holds on, reluctant to let go of the day. Walls feel warmer than they should. The floor radiates a faint echo of afternoon heat. This isn't your imagination. And it isn't just your building being stubborn. You're sleeping inside an urban heat bubble, and it doesn't clock out when the sun does. A mainstream historical fact sets the stage. The urban heat island effect was first formally described in the early 19th century, when scientists noticed that cities stayed significantly warmer than surrounding countryside, especially at night. Stone, brick, asphalt, and concrete absorb solar energy during the day and release it slowly after dark. In the past, cities were smaller, lower, and more porous. Today's dense urban landscapes act like massive thermal batteries. Your body, meanwhile, expects nights to cool. That expectation is hardwired. Urban heat islands disrupt it by flattening the temperature curve, keeping nighttime air several degrees warmer than nearby rural areas. What this difference might sound minor on paper, but to sleep physiology, it's meaningful. Cooling is not optional for deep sleep. It's a requirement. You lie there, sheets slightly tangled, aware that even if the air temperature reads fine, something feels off. That's because radiant heat matters too. Warm walls, ceilings, and pavement outside your building continue to emit energy, slowing your body's ability to shed its own heat. Sleep becomes a negotiation rather than a surrender. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost poetic. Some studies using satellite data show that cities glow thermally at night, not just with light but with heat, visible in infrared long after sunset. Historians still argue whether early city dwellers noticed this effect consciously or simply describe cities as places of restless nights. The language existed long before the measurements. You adjust again, unconsciously spreading limbs to increase surface area, helping heat escape. This is basic mammal behavior. Animals do it. Babies do it. You do it without thinking. But when the surrounding environment resists cooling, the strategy only goes so far. Your nervous system responds by staying lightly alert, monitoring temperature and hydration, keeping systems flexible. Light joke checkpoint quietly. Your city is basically a space heater with zoning laws. Second, trees are out here doing their best, and the asphalt is undoing all their work. Third, you wanted a cool night breeze and got urban simmer. Urban heat doesn't just affect temperature, it changes timing. In cities, the coolest point of the night often occurs later than in rural areas, sometimes close to sunrise. That delays the deepest sleep window, compressing restorative stages into a shorter span. You may sleep the same number of hours and still feel under-recovered, like you left the best part of sleep waiting in line. Historically, wealth and sleep have intersected here in uncomfortable ways. In many cities, neighborhoods with fewer trees and more pavement experience stronger heat island effects. Historians still argue whether chronic sleep deprivation in urban populations has roots not just in work schedules and noise, but in these environmental inequalities baked into city design. Sleep, it turns out, is shaped by zoning decisions made decades ago. There's also a humidity crossover. Urban areas often trap moisture as well as heat, especially after rain. Warm, humid nights are particularly challenging for sleep because they block both convective and evaporative cooling. Your body sweats, but the sweat lingers. Cooling stalls. The brain takes note. You might rely on air conditioning, and for many people, it's essential. But even AC has limits. Units cycle. Power grids strain. Cooling isn't always even, and the contrast between cooled air and warm surfaces can confuse thermal perception. Sleep prefers gradual, predictable change, not abrupt blasts followed by silence. There's a fringe but intriguing conversation among urban planners about nighttime livability. It asks not just how cities function by day, but how well they allow bodies to rest by night. Green roofs, reflective materials, shaded streets, And tree canopies aren't just aesthetic choices, they're sleep interventions. Historians still argue whether future cities will be judged partly by how well their residents sleep. As you rest now, the city hums faintly. Distant traffic, HVAC systems, the low electrical buzz of a place that never fully powers down. Even these sounds are shaped by heat. Windows stay closed, machines run longer, the night remains active. Your brain filters most of it out, but the effort itself keeps sleep lighter. And yet you adapt. Humans always do. Your body lowers metabolic rate where it can, redistributes blood flow, and compromises on sleep depth to maintain duration. You may not get the textbook perfect night, but you get enough. Enough to function. When enough to dream, enough to heal incrementally. Historians still argue whether humans will physiologically adapt over generations to warmer urban nights, or whether adaptation must come from design rather than biology. Evolution is slow. Concrete is fast. Sleep sits in between, waiting to see which one blinks. As the night moves toward morning, the city finally exhales a little heat. The air cools just enough. Your body notices immediately, seizing the opportunity to slip into deeper rest for a while. Those last hours of sleep often feel heavier, more satisfying, because the conditions finally align. You don't wake thinking about heat islands or urban planning. You wake thinking about coffee, or the day ahead, or nothing at all. But your sleep has been shaped quietly and consistently by the city holding on to yesterday's sun. Tonight, like every night, you rest inside that system, not broken, not failing, just adapting. Sleep in cities has always been a little harder. The miracle isn't that it's imperfect. The miracle is that it still happens at all. You think the room is dark. It feels dark. Your eyes are closed, the curtains are drawn, and yet there's a faint glow pressing through your eyelids, like the suggestion of morning that arrived far too early. This is not just city lights being rude again. The atmosphere itself has learned how to scatter light differently, and your sleep has noticed. Light scattering is a simple idea with complicated consequences. A mainstream historical fact. Before widespread electric lighting, night was genuinely dark for most humans. Moon, stars, firelight, that was it. With the rise of artificial lighting in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, cities began to glow. What's changed more recently is how that light behaves once it enters the atmosphere. Increased aerosols, moisture, and particulate matter scatter artificial light more efficiently, spreading it farther and brighter across the night sky. This phenomenon is called sky glow, and it blurs the boundary between night and day. Even far from city centers, clouds and particles reflect light back down, turning what should be darkness into a dim, persistent twilight. Your eyes may be closed, but light still reaches specialized cells in the retina that report directly to the brain's circadian clock. You don't see the light, your biology does. And here's a quirky tidbit that feels almost unfair. You can suppress melatonin, the hormone that helps regulate sleep, without consciously perceiving light at all. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial humans experienced anything comparable during full moons combined with cloud cover, or whether modern sky glow represents an entirely new sensory environment. Either way, your brain evolved expecting a much sharper contrast between day and night than it now receives. You shift slightly, turning your face away from the window, even though your eyes are closed. This instinctive movement isn't learned, it's built in. Mammals avoid light when they sleep. Light suggests exposure. Exposure suggests vulnerability. When the night refuses to be fully dark, the nervous system stays just a bit more alert, by maintaining readiness you never consciously requested. Light joke moment, softly delivered. The stars are still there. They're just being aggressively overshadowed. Second, the night tried to clock out and the city said, just one more thing. Third, you asked for darkness and got ambient lighting. Atmospheric conditions amplify this effect. Humidity, low clouds, and aerosols act like mirrors, reflecting artificial light downward instead of letting it escape into space. Ironically, cloudy nights, once the darkest, can now be the brightest in urban and suburban areas. The result is a night that looks dim but behaves bright, confusing the systems that govern sleep timing. Historically, darkness acted as a powerful sleep signal. When the sun went down, melatonin rose reliably, Body temperature dropped and sleep followed. Would historians still argue whether segmented sleep patterns in pre-industrial societies, first sleep and second sleep, were supported by deeper darkness between phases? Modern light pollution may not just shorten sleep, it may compress it, erasing natural pauses and transitions. You don't wake thinking, ah yes, circadian photoreception. You wake thinking, why did that feel shallow? Light at night doesn't usually wake people outright. It thins sleep, increases awakenings you don't remember, and shifts sleep timing later. The brain stays flexible, but flexibility comes at the cost of depth. There's also color to consider. Modern lighting is rich in blue wavelengths, which are particularly effective at signaling daytime to the brain. Even light scattered indirectly through clouds or reflected off buildings carries enough of this signal to matter. Historians still argue whether earlier gas and fire-based lighting had similar effects, or whether the spectral quality of modern LEDs represents a unique challenge for sleep. Your bedroom may feel like a sanctuary, but light sneaks in through unexpected paths, under doors, around curtains, reflected off walls. And when atmospheric conditions amplify that light, the boundary between inside and outside blurs. Sleep likes boundaries, clear ones. There's a fringe but growing discussion about nocturnal ecology, the idea that artificial light reshapes not just animal behavior, but human rest patterns as well. Insects, birds, and plants respond dramatically to altered nightlight. Humans are no exception. And we're just better at pretending we're unaffected. You might notice that you fall asleep fine, but wake earlier than you want, especially in cities or during cloudy nights. That's light doing its quiet work at the tail end of sleep, nudging the brain toward morning before the body's ready. It's not insomnia, it's premature encouragement. Historians still argue whether widespread light pollution has shifted average human sleep duration downward over generations, or whether people simply redistribute sleep across naps and weekends. What's clear is that darkness, true darkness, has become rarer, and sleep evolved, expecting it in abundance. As you lie there, your body does what it always does. It adapts. Melatonin still rises, just not as high. Sleep still deepens, just not as consistently. Dreams still come, though they may feel more fragile and more easily interrupted. This isn't failure. It's adjustment under suboptimal conditions. You might instinctively pull the blanket up over your eyes, seeking darkness within darkness. This small act matters. Pressure, enclosure, and sensory reduction all tell the nervous system that it's safe to let go. Even when the sky refuses to cooperate, your body finds ways to create night. Eventually the glow fades, not because the lights turn off, but because your brain sinks deeper, prioritizing rest over vigilance. The world doesn't get darker, you simply care less about it for a while. That in its own way is a victory. The night was never meant to be bright, but even in a world where darkness is diluted and scattered, sleep still finds cracks to slip through. You rest not because conditions are perfect, but because rest is resilient. And as you drift onward, wrapped in a dimness that's thinner than it used to be, your body remembers what to do. It always does. You don't feel short of breath. That's the interesting part. Breathing feels normal, quiet, automatic, unremarkable. And yet the air itself is subtly different from what it once was, slightly less dense, slightly less eager to deliver the same comfort it always has. Nothing dramatic is happening to you. Something gradual is happening around you. A mainstream historical fact anchors this gently. As global temperatures rise, the atmosphere expands. Warmer air is less dense than cooler air, and while the total amount of oxygen in the atmosphere hasn't meaningfully changed, the way air behaves, especially at night, has. Heat, humidity, and circulation patterns alter how efficiently oxygen moves from air to lungs, and particularly during sleep when breathing is naturally slower and shallower. You lie there, chest rising and falling, and your body compensates without complaint. The brainstem monitors oxygen and carbon dioxide continuously, adjusting breathing depth with tiny, precise changes. Most nights this works flawlessly, but when the air is warmer, more humid or stagnant, those adjustments happen more often. Sleep continues, but it stays closer to the surface, like a boat tethered to shore. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds almost poetic. Some sleep researchers compare warm, stagnant nights to sleeping at a very mild altitude. Not enough to cause symptoms, but enough to change sleep architecture. Historians still argue whether people living in ancient highland cities experience chronically lighter sleep, or whether long-term adaptation smoothed the effect. Either way, your body knows how to adapt. It just prefers consistency. You might notice more sighs during sleep on these nights. That's not anxiety. That's physiology. Sighing helps reset breathing patterns and improve oxygen exchange. Your body does it automatically, even while dreaming. Light joke moment, barely above a whisper. Your lungs are rebooting. Second, sleep is running background updates. Third, oxygen delivery is doing its best on night mode. There's an ongoing scholarly debate here, fittingly unresolved. Historians still argue whether modern sleep disruption attributed to air quality is driven more by chemical composition, thermal effects, or changes in air density and circulation. The truth likely lives in the overlap. Sleep doesn't experience variables separately. It experiences the night as a whole. As the hours pass, the air outside cools a little, circulation improves, and breathing grows more efficient. Your body responds immediately, easing deeper once conditions allow. This responsiveness is not weakness, it's sensitivity, and it has kept humans alive through ice ages, heat waves, and everything in between. Now the pace slows, the science steps back, the night softens its grip. You no longer need to track the atmosphere, the chemistry, the patterns overhead. Your body already has. It always does. Every breath you take is adjusted, refined, quietly optimized without your permission or attention. There is nothing for you to manage here. The air may be thinner than it once was. The nights may be warmer, brighter, less predictable. And still, sleep arrives when you give it space. While your breathing stretches out, unhurried, in and out. Longer pauses between thoughts. Fewer edges on sensations. You don't need perfect conditions. You only need enough safety, enough familiarity, enough permission to let go. Your muscles soften as if they remember something old. Your jaw loosens, your shoulders sink. The weight of the day slides off in pieces, not all at once, and that's fine. Even in a changing atmosphere, your body knows how to rest. Even when the sky behaves differently, the night still belongs to you. Sleep does not demand perfection, it accepts adaptation. So you let the air be what it is. You let the night do its quiet work, and you drift, not analyzing, not adjusting, just breathing, just resting, just here. The science fades into the background. The thoughts stretch farther apart. And whatever comes next can wait until morning. You don't wake up confused about what time it is. You wake up unsure of when you are. Night feels shorter than it should, morning closer than expected, as if someone quietly slid the clock forward while you slept. This isn't just fatigue talking. Your internal timing system, the circadian clock, is working with cues that no longer line up the way they once did. Circadian rhythms evolved to synchronize with very stable signals, light, darkness, temperature changes, and seasonal patterns. A mainstream historical fact. The existence of an internal biological clock was confirmed in the 18th century when scientists observed that plants continued opening and closing their leaves on a daily schedule, even in constant darkness. Humans are no different. You carry a clock inside you that expects the world to behave in certain ways, but the atmosphere has started giving mixed messages. Nights stay warmer longer. Light lingers through clouds and haze. Weather shifts abruptly instead of gradually. Each of these nudges your circadian system just slightly out of alignment. Not enough to cause jet lag, but enough to blur the edges of sleep. You fall asleep later than your body expects, or wake earlier than you want, or drift through lighter stages longer than feels fair. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels unsettlingly precise. Your circadian clock relies heavily on changes, the rate of cooling after sunset, the steepness of morning light, not just absolute levels. Historians still argue whether modern environments flatten these transitions so much that the brain struggles to tell night from not quite night. Your clock doesn't want perfection, it wants contrast. You lie there half asleep, half aware, and your brain does math you never asked it to do. Is it still night? Is morning coming? Should I stay under or start preparing? This uncertainty keeps sleep lighter, more easily broken by thoughts that normally wouldn't make it past the gate. Light joke moment, softly placed. Your circadian clock brought a schedule, the atmosphere brought improvisation. Second, your body is punctual, the planet is running late. Third, you asked for bedtime, got a moving target. Temperature is a major player here. Traditionally, nights cooled steadily, reaching a minimum just before dawn. That curve helped anchor sleep depth and timing. When nights cool unevenly, or not much at all, the brain loses one of its strongest cues. Melatonin release still happens, but its timing can drift, stretching or compressing sleep in ways that feel unfamiliar. Historically, seasonal changes were also clearer. Longer nights in winter, shorter in summer, with relatively predictable transitions. Historians still argue whether modern atmospheric changes have blurred seasonal boundaries enough to affect circadian alignment across populations, especially in mid-latitude regions. When autumn feels like extended summer and winter arrives in fits and starts, your clock hesitates. There's also the interaction with light scattering you felt earlier. When nights never become fully dark, the circadian system stays partially convinced that daytime is nearby. This doesn't stop sleep outright. It changes its character. REM sleep shifts. Early morning awakenings increase. You wake with the sense that sleep ended before it was done speaking. You may notice that weekends don't fix this. Sleeping in helps a little, but not completely. That's because circadian misalignment isn't just about quantity, it's about timing. You can't bank sleep effectively if your internal clock and the environment disagree on when rest should happen. There's a fringe but increasingly discussed idea called circadian noise. It describes environments where cues fluctuate too much for the clock to lock onto a stable rhythm. Not chaos, just inconsistency. Historians still argue whether humans in pre-industrial times experienced less circadian noise due to stronger natural signals, or whether variability was simply accepted as normal. What's different now is how many signals overlap and conflict. As you rest, your body keeps trying to resynchronize. It uses whatever cues it can trust. The quiet of the room, the familiar pressure of the mattress, your breathing rhythm. These internal signals matter more when external ones become unreliable. Sleep leans inward. You don't need to force alignment. The circadian system is remarkably patient. Given repeated gentle cues, darkness, calm, routine, it adjusts. Slowly, incrementally. Even in a changing atmosphere, your clock doesn't give up. It just recalibrates more often than it used to. Historians still argue whether future generations will adapt circadian timing biologically or whether the burden will remain on environment design and behavior. Biology moves slowly. Nights are changing quickly. Sleep lives in the middle, translating one to the other. As the hours pass, your clock settles into a temporary agreement with the night. Not perfect, not precise, but workable. Sleep deepens where it can, loosens where it must, and keeps going. You don't need to know exactly what time it is. Your body does, approximately. And approximately is enough. The night continues, imperfect but holding. Your circadian clock keeps time the best it can, and you rest, not on certainty, but on rhythm. Your breathing deepens, then pauses for a moment longer than you expect. Not alarming, just noticeable. The kind of pause that feels like your body checking in with itself before continuing on. In the quiet of night, chemistry matters more than you think, and the mix of gases around you has begun to nudge sleep in subtle, persistent ways. Breathing during sleep is not the same as breathing during the day. A mainstream historical fact. Researchers discovered in the mid-20th century that ventilation drops significantly during sleep, especially during REM, with reduced responsiveness to oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Sleep is designed to conserve energy, but that design assumes a fairly stable atmospheric backdrop. As you rest, oxygen and carbon dioxide perform a delicate exchange across millions of tiny air sacs in your lungs. Small changes in nighttime air composition, CO2 creeping upward indoors, and ozone traces lingering, humidity-altering gas diffusion. Don't stop this exchange. They simply make it less efficient. Your body compensates automatically by adjusting breathing depth and rhythm, often without ever waking you fully. You might notice more shallow breathing, more sighs, or a faint sense of chest tightness that dissolves when you roll over. These aren't symptoms of danger. They're signs of fine-tuning. Sleep physiology is incredibly precise, and when the chemistry shifts even slightly, the system responds by staying a little more alert. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds like trivia but isn't. During sleep, your brain is actually less sensitive to low oxygen than it is when you're awake, but more sensitive to rising carbon dioxide. Historians still argue whether this evolutionary trade-off developed primarily to protect airway patency or to conserve energy during rest. Either way, it means CO2 plays an outsized role in shaping how deeply you sleep. Light joke checkpoint. Barely audible. Your lungs are negotiating contracts while you dream. Second, breathing has a night mode, and it's very particular. Third, sleep asked for peace and chemistry showed up with notes. As atmospheric conditions change, this balance becomes harder to maintain. Warmer air holds more moisture, which can slow oxygen diffusion slightly. Indoor air accumulates exhaled CO2 overnight, especially in sealed rooms. Pollutants add irritation that subtly increases breathing effort. None of these are crises. Together, they shift sleep toward lighter stages, and where breathing control is more flexible and arousal thresholds are lower. Historically, humans slept in environments with far more air exchange. Drafty homes, open windows, outdoor sleeping during warm seasons. Historians still argue whether these conditions promoted deeper sleep through better gas exchange, or whether noise and temperature variability offset the benefit. Modern bedrooms are quieter and more stable, but the air inside them changes more over the course of the night. You may find yourself waking briefly without knowing why. No noise, no thought, just a repositioning, a deeper breath, then sleep again. These microarousals often correspond to moments when breathing needed adjustment. Your brain surfaced just long enough to fix the problem, then disappeared again. Efficient, unglamorous, effective. Each where there's also a connection to dreams. REM sleep places unique demands on breathing with irregular patterns and reduced muscle tone. When gas exchange feels slightly strained, REM becomes easier to interrupt. Dreams fragment. You remember pieces instead of narratives. This isn't pathology, it's adaptation. The brain prioritizes stable breathing over uninterrupted storytelling. A fringe but intriguing line of research suggests that changing nighttime air chemistry may partially explain why some people report more vivid or anxious dreams in recent years. Historians still argue whether dream content reliably reflects physiological stressors or whether interpretation shifts with culture. Still, the sleeping brain does tend to turn bodily signals into symbolic imagery. You breathe again, deeper this time. The chest rises, the pause lengthens, or the rhythm resets. That reset is the point. Your body is not struggling, it's optimizing. Sleep isn't meant to be a perfectly smooth descent. It's a series of adjustments that, taken together, add up to rest. There's also a social misconception worth gently setting aside. People often assume that good sleep means total unconsciousness, 8 hours straight, no movement, no interruption. Historically, that idea is very new. Humans have always slept in ways that allowed periodic check-ins with breathing, temperature, and environment. What's changing now is how often those check-ins are needed. Historians still argue whether the modern increase in reported sleep problems reflects worse sleep or simply greater awareness of it. When science names processes that were once invisible, people begin noticing them. Awareness can feel like decline, even when function remains. As the night progresses, indoor CO2 levels peak, then begin to fall as you approach morning and air circulation shifts. Temperature drops slightly, humidity eases, gas exchange improves. Your body takes advantage of the window, slipping into deeper sleep when chemistry finally aligns. You don't control any of this consciously, and you don't need to. The nervous system is built to handle far worse than a mildly altered atmosphere. It's handled smoke, altitude, ice ages, and heat waves. What you're feeling isn't fragility, it's responsiveness. Historians still argue whether long-term adaptation to changing atmospheric chemistry will occur biologically or behaviorally. Will bodies adjust or will environments change first? The answer is probably both. In the meantime, sleep continues its quiet work in the middle ground. Your breathing smooths. The pauses become less noticeable. Thoughts thin out again. Whatever chemistry remains unresolved is no longer urgent enough to interrupt rest. You don't need perfect air to sleep. You need workable air. Air that's close enough. And tonight, close enough is doing its job. You drift on, breathing adjusted, chemistry negotiated, sleep continuing, not because the atmosphere is unchanged, but because you are extraordinarily good at resting within change. You feel it as a faint lightness, not in your mood, but in your body, a sense that sleep is a little less anchored than it used to be, like your mattress has lifted a fraction of an inch off the floor. You're not gasping, you're not uncomfortable, you're just hovering. Well, this is what altitude feels like to sleep. And lately, traces of that experience are appearing in places that never used to have it. Altitude has always shaped human rest, a mainstream historical fact. People living at high elevations consistently experience lighter, more fragmented sleep, especially during the first weeks after ascent. This has been documented for centuries, from Andean highlands to Himalayan plateaus. Lower oxygen pressure leads to more awakenings, altered breathing patterns, and reduced deep sleep. Over time, bodies adapt, but the transition is unmistakable. What's different now is that some of those sensations are no longer confined to mountains. As global temperatures rise, the atmosphere expands. Air density decreases slightly, especially during warm, stagnant nights. And this doesn't reduce oxygen concentration in any meaningful way at sea level, but it does affect how efficiently oxygen moves from air to blood during sleep, when breathing is slower and muscles are more relaxed. The effect is mild, subtle, but sleep is exquisitely sensitive to mild. You might notice it as more tossing, more vivid dreams, or a sense that sleep worked, but not as deeply as you hoped. It's not altitude sickness, it's altitude flavor, a whisper of thinness where there used to be none. Here's a quirky tidbit that sounds like science fiction but isn't. Some sleep researchers have described warm urban nights as producing a functional altitude, equivalent of several hundred feet above sea level. Historians still argue whether this comparison is physiologically precise or merely illustrative, but the experience lines up. Lighter sleep, altered breathing rhythm, more frequent micro-awakenings. You roll onto your side. Your body responds by redistributing blood flow and adjusting ventilation. Side sleeping, incidentally, is one of the ways humans unconsciously optimize breathing efficiency, an ancient solution to a modern problem. Light joke moment, gently placed, your body is running a sleep optimization patch. Second, altitude used to require mountains. Now it just needs a heat wave. Third, you signed up for bed, not a subtle elevation gain. Historically, humans adapted to altitude through generations. Larger lung volumes, increased red blood cell counts, altered breathing control. That takes time. Historians still argue whether lowland populations living through prolonged warming will experience any comparable physiological shifts, or whether behavioral and environmental changes will carry most of the burden. Evolution is patient. Sleep complaints are not. There's also an overlap with nighttime breathing disorders. Even very mild reductions in oxygen pressure can make breathing slightly less stable during sleep, especially in REM. This doesn't mean new illness. It means existing vulnerabilities become more noticeable. Snoring increases, breathing pauses lengthen just enough to trigger micro-arousals. You wake feeling like you ran background processes all night. In high-altitude regions, people historically adjusted expectations around sleep. Shorter nights, more daytime rest. Acceptance that sleep felt different above a certain elevation. Modern life, however, expects uniform sleep performance everywhere, every night. Your biology never agreed to that contract. There's a fringe but fascinating area of research examining how ancient travelers describe sleep at elevation. Some accounts from early trade routes mention thin nights or shallow dreams long before oxygen was understood. Historians still argue whether these descriptions reflect real physiological effects or poetic metaphor. Either way, the language matches what many people quietly report today, far from any mountain pass. You don't consciously think the air's thinner. You think, why am I waking up so easily? The cause hides behind the experience, like a stagehand moving scenery in the dark. Sleep reacts to outcomes, not explanations. The spreading of altitude-like sleep effects also intersects with geography. Hotter nights in coastal cities, elevated plateaus warming faster than valleys, inland heat domes, each creates conditions where air stagnates and density drops slightly. None of this is dramatic enough to make headlines. It's dramatic enough to make sleep feel off. Historians still argue whether modern humans are experiencing a kind of micro-altitude migration without moving, living in environments that behave differently at night than they did decades ago. The body doesn't care about the label, it just responds. You sigh in your sleep, a deeper breath that resets the rhythm. That sigh is a pressure equalizer, a way to pull more air in when diffusion feels sluggish. Your body has dozens of these tricks. You learned them before language, before memory. When they work whether you notice them or not. There's also a psychological echo here. Altitude has always been associated with alertness, vigilance, exposure. Sleeping higher up once meant fewer trees, harsher winds, less shelter. Even today, sleeping in unfamiliar environments produces lighter sleep. When the air itself changes character, the nervous system leans slightly toward that old logic. Stay ready. Light joke check-in. Very quiet now. Your ancestors slept in caves and you're struggling with slightly expanded air. Second, sleep really prefers sea level vibes. Third, the atmosphere is experimenting and your mattress is not amused. Despite all this, sleep continues. It may arrive in shorter cycles. It may retreat more easily, but it doesn't abandon you. Humans have slept on mountains, ships, plains, and deserts. When we sleep in airplanes at cruising altitude, badly but still, the capacity remains. As the night deepens, temperatures fall, air contracts, circulation improves. That faint altitude feeling eases. Your body notices immediately, sliding into deeper rest when conditions allow. These windows matter. Even short periods of deeper sleep carry real restorative power. Historians still argue whether future nights will require more intentional design, ventilation, cooling, airflow, to preserve sea-level sleep in a changing atmosphere. For now, your body does the designing internally moment by moment. You don't need to label tonight's sleep as good or bad. It's adaptive. It's responsive. It's doing the best it can with the air it's given. And as you breathe in again, slower now, steadier, you settle a little more firmly back into yourself. And the mattress feels solid. The room feels grounded. Whatever thinness lingered has passed, at least for now. Sleep doesn't require perfect density. It requires enough. And enough, once again, has arrived. You notice the seasons slipping, not dramatically, but sideways. Winter doesn't arrive when it used to. Summer overstays. Spring hesitates. Autumn blurs. You still sleep through the year, of course, but the timing feels less anchored, like the calendar lost its grip on the night. Seasonal cues have always mattered to sleep, a mainstream historical fact. Long before artificial lighting, human sleep duration reliably expanded in winter and contracted in summer, tracking day length and temperature with remarkable consistency. Historical diaries, monastery records, and agricultural logs all show longer winter sleep, and often with extended nighttime rest or segmented patterns. Your circadian system evolved expecting that rhythm. What's changing now isn't the existence of seasons, it's their timing and clarity. Warmer autumns delay the cooling nights that normally signal deeper, earlier sleep. Winters arrive later, sometimes milder, sometimes erratic. Spring warmth comes early, then retreats. These shifts confuse the internal calendar your body uses to anticipate how much sleep it needs and when. You lie there in what should be a crisp night, but isn't. The body waits for a signal that doesn't quite come. Melatonin still rises, temperature still drops, but the slope is wrong. The timing is off. Sleep happens, but it doesn't settle where it used to. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels oddly specific. In some long-term studies, people report the greatest sleep dissatisfaction not during extreme weather, but during unseasonal weather. Warm spells in winter, cold snaps in spring. Historians still argue whether humans are more disturbed by absolute conditions or by violations of expectation. Your nervous system, it seems, hates surprises more than discomfort. Seasonal timing once governed everything from bedtimes to wake times to social rhythms. Harvest ended, nights lengthened, sleep followed. Industrialization weakened those links, but didn't erase them. The body still keeps a seasonal ledger, even if your calendar app does not. Light joke moment, gently placed. Your body packed a winter sleep schedule, and the weather brought summer casual. Second, you planned for cozy nights and got maybe later. Third, seasons are freelancing now. As seasons slide, our circadian alignment becomes harder to maintain. The brain expects certain light and temperature patterns at certain times of year. When those patterns drift, the clock hesitates. You might feel sleepy at odd hours or restless when you expect heaviness. This isn't insomnia, it's seasonal confusion. Historically, communities adapted together. When winter sleep stretched longer, work slowed. When summer nights shortened, naps filled the gap. Historians still argue whether communal seasonal adaptation protected sleep quality in the past, or whether modern fixed schedules are the real stressor when seasons misbehave. Either way, your body remembers a time when the world adjusted with it. There's also a subtle emotional component. Seasonal transitions often carry psychological meaning, renewal, rest, closure. When those transitions blur, and the nervous system loses a layer of predictability, sleep, which thrives on predictability, becomes lighter. Not anxious, just watchful. You might notice that certain months no longer feel restorative the way they once did. Winter doesn't deliver the deep hibernation vibe. Summer doesn't bring the clean exhaustion that earns easy sleep. Everything feels a bit blended, like a playlist with no track breaks. There's a fringe but fascinating body of research on phenology, the timing of natural events like flowering and migration, and its relationship to human rhythms. Some studies suggest that when ecological calendars shift, human sleep patterns subtly shift too. Historians still argue whether this reflects direct biological coupling or cultural habit, but humans have always slept as part of ecosystems, not apart from them. Where your body responds by leaning harder on internal cues, routine becomes more important. Familiarity matters more than season. The mattress, the darkness you can create, the sounds you recognize, these anchor sleep when the outside world stops doing so reliably. You roll over, and the movement feels automatic, practiced. Sleep continues in cycles that may be slightly shorter or longer than usual. That variability used to be seasonal. Now it's more frequent. Again, not catastrophic, just different. Another light joke whispered, "The seasons miss their meeting." Second, your circadian clock is checking its notes. Third, winter called, said running late. Historians still argue whether future generations will experience seasons more as moods than as schedules. If winter no longer guarantees long nights and cold air, will sleep patterns detach entirely from the year? Or will humans find new seasonal markers, energy use, social rhythms, artificial light patterns to replace the old ones? Sleep waits, adaptable, but curious. As the night progresses, your body doesn't need to know what season it is. It needs enough darkness, enough cooling, enough quiet. When those appear, even briefly, sleep deepens. Restoration happens in pockets rather than blocks. You may wake feeling like the year rushed by faster than expected. That's not just memory, it's rhythm. When seasonal sleep changes compress, time feels different. Nights feel shorter, months blur. Sleep used to stretch time out. Now it sometimes folds it in. And still, you rest. Not because the seasons are stable, but because rest is resilient. The atmosphere may slide the calendar sideways, but your body keeps finding night wherever it can. It adapts to early warmth, delayed cold, uncertain transitions. Sleep doesn't demand that seasons behave. It only asks for moments of alignment. As you breathe steadily again, the idea of season fades. Tonight is just tonight. This bed is just this bed. The air is whatever it is. And within that, sleep continues, patient as ever, waiting for the world to settle, but never waiting to do its work. You're not the only one feeling this. That thought drifts through you gently, not as worry, but as context. Some bodies notice atmospheric change more sharply than others, and sleep becomes the first place it shows. Not because those sleepers are fragile, but because their systems are finely tuned. A mainstream historical fact grounds this quietly. Across centuries, medical records have consistently shown that children, older adults, and people with irregular work schedules experience more sleep disruption during environmental stress. This was noted during heat waves, cold snaps, poor air quality events, and even unusual weather patterns long before modern sleep science existed. Vulnerability in this case often means sensitivity, not weakness. Children, for instance, rely heavily on stable cues. Their circadian systems are still learning the rhythms of the world. When nights stay warmer, brighter, or noisier than expected, sleep onset becomes harder and awakenings more frequent. Young bodies regulate temperature less efficiently, and their breathing responds more dramatically to changes in air quality. They don't explain this. They protest it with restlessness, early waking, or bedtime resistance. Older adults feel different shifts. With age, deep sleep naturally decreases, and thermoregulation becomes less flexible. A warmer night that a younger body shrugs off may significantly fragment an older sleeper's rest. Barometric pressure changes, trigger aches more readily, light intrudes more easily through aging eyes. Historians still argue whether sleep was always lighter in later life, or whether modern environmental stressors have amplified an age-old pattern. Then there are shift workers, the group most visibly out of sync with the atmosphere. Sleeping during the day or at odd hours already requires swimming upstream against light and temperature cues. When those cues grow more inconsistent due to atmospheric change, the challenge compounds. A daytime sleeper trying to rest during a heat wave or smoke event faces a double mismatch. Wrong time, wrong air. Here's a quirky tidbit that feels surprisingly human. Some early 20th century factory studies noted that night shift workers slept worse during periods of unusual weather, even when work hours stayed the same. Historians still argue whether weather directly impaired sleep or whether morale and fatigue played larger roles. Either way, the pattern was there. Light joke moment, gently offered. Sleep already had favorites, and the atmosphere just made the list longer. Second, kids, elders, and shift workers didn't sign up to beta test the sky. Third, circadian rhythm is a team sport, and some players are carrying extra weight. There's also a social layer to who sleeps worst. People in lower quality housing experience stronger effects from heat, humidity, and pollution. Limited access to cooling, ventilation, or air filtration turns atmospheric shifts into nightly stressors. Historians still argue whether sleep inequality has always mirrored environmental inequality or whether modern climate dynamics have sharpened the divide. Sleep, like health, follows the contours of access. You might recognize this in yourself or someone you know. A child who suddenly wakes earlier, a parent who can't sleep through storms anymore, a friend on night shifts who never quite feels rested. These aren't personal failures. They're predictable responses to environments asking more of certain bodies than others. And there's a fringe but meaningful discussion in sleep science about sentinel sleepers. These are individuals whose nervous systems remain more alert during rest, historically serving protective roles in groups. Some researchers speculate that children and elders may share aspects of this sensitivity, not because they're meant to stay awake, but because their sleep systems are more reactive to change. Historians still argue whether such roles existed formally or emerged naturally. Either way, heightened sensitivity has always existed. You, lying there now, may feel somewhere in the middle. Some nights hit harder than others. Some changes register, others pass unnoticed. That variability is normal. Sleep sensitivity isn't a fixed trait. It shifts with health, stress, age, and environment. And the important part, the reassuring part, is that adaptation happens unevenly, but it does happen. Children's sleep stabilizes as routines strengthen. Older adults learn patterns that protect rest. Shift workers develop strategies that anchor sleep despite misaligned cues. None of this is perfect. All of it is functional. Historians still argue whether future sleep guidelines will become more personalized, accounting for age, work schedule, and environmental exposure as primary factors rather than footnotes. The idea that everyone needs the same 8 hours is already softening. Atmosphere-aware sleep science may soften it further. As you rest, the thought that others are navigating similar nights carries a strange comfort. You're not alone under this sky. Millions of sleepers are adjusting their breathing, shifting their blankets, and negotiating with light and heat at this very moment, and sleep still happens. It may come earlier for some, later for others. Deeper here, lighter there, but it continues, distributed unevenly, yes, yet persistently. You don't need to rank your sleep against anyone else's. You don't need to fit an average. You only need enough rest for your body under your conditions. As the night settles again, you feel the mattress, the room, the quiet inside your chest. Whatever group you belong to, young, old, off schedule, or somewhere between, your body is doing its best with the air it has. And that effort, quiet and constant, is already carrying you toward morning. You reach a point in the night where the question quietly shifts. It's no longer what is changing. It becomes, what can you do about it? Not in a frantic, fix everything way, but in a calm, a practical sense, the way you adjust a pillow without fully waking up. Humans have always adapted sleep to environment, a mainstream historical fact. Across cultures and centuries, people modified bedding, architecture, routines, and timing to protect rest from heat, cold, light, and noise. Sleep was never passive, it was negotiated. What's different now is the pace of change, not the need to respond. Adaptation doesn't mean controlling the atmosphere, it means buffering it. Your body already does half the work. The rest happens at the edges, where environment meets habit. Small changes matter more than perfect ones. Cooling the body rather than the whole room. Darkening the immediate sleep space even if the sky glows. Moving air, not necessarily lowering temperature. As these strategies mirror what humans have done instinctively for thousands of years, here's a quirky tidbit that feels reassuring. Many traditional sleep adaptations now recommended by modern science, cooler bedrooms, airflow, darkness, consistent routines, were common before sleep science existed. Historians still argue whether we're innovating or rediscovering. Either way, the body recognizes what helps. You might crack a window earlier in the evening to flush out warm air. You might run a fan to restore the feeling of movement. You might block light at eye level rather than fighting the whole room. None of these need to be perfect. Sleep improves with better, not ideal. Light joke moment, gently placed. You don't need a sleep lab, just a cooperative pillow. Second, your ancestors slept through ice ages with moss. You've got options. Third, adaptation is just comfort with a resume. Breathing support matters too. Ventilation helps with CO2 buildup. Air filtration helps during smoke events. Humidity control, whether adding or removing moisture, reduces how hard your body has to work. These aren't luxuries, they're environmental translators, smoothing the message the atmosphere sends to your nervous system. Historically, people slept in ways that allowed retreat when conditions were harsh. Shorter nights, split sleep, naps. Historians still argue whether modern insistence on one uninterrupted block of sleep actually increases stress when conditions interfere. Flexibility, it turns out, is adaptive. Sleep has always come in shapes. There's also timing. Going to bed slightly earlier on hot nights when indoor air is freshest. One, letting go of the idea that every night must feel identical. Accepting lighter sleep occasionally without labeling it failure. The nervous system relaxes when expectations soften, or a fringe but growing discussion in sleep research centers on environmental forgiveness, designing sleep spaces that reduce how much the body has to compensate. This includes materials that don't retain heat, layouts that encourage airflow, and routines that reinforce internal cues when external ones wobble. Historians still argue whether future homes will be judged partly by how well they support sleep under variable conditions. You don't need to do everything. You don't need to optimize. Sleep improves when the body senses cooperation rather than control, when you meet it halfway. And there's an emotional adaptation too. An understanding that some restlessness is environmental, not personal, loosens the grip of frustration. Frustration is alerting. Permission is calming. The moment you stop fighting the night often softens. You notice this now. The mattress feels more supportive. Your breathing settles faster after movement. Your mind doesn't chase solutions. It trusts the setup you've given it. That trust is powerful. It lowers vigilance. Historians still argue whether humanity will adapt more through technology or through acceptance and rhythm. Likely both. But sleep doesn't wait for the debate to end. It works with whatever is available. Tonight, what's available is enough. Enough cooling, enough darkness, enough air movement, enough understanding. You don't need to fix the planet before morning. You don't need to future-proof your biology. You only need to create a small pocket of safety and familiarity, and you already have. As the night deepens, the adaptations fade into the background. They don't demand attention. They simply reduce effort. Sleep, relieved of some of its work, settles more fully. You're not mastering sleep. You're cooperating with it. And that cooperation, quiet, practical, forgiving, is often all it takes. You arrive at a quieter understanding now. Not a conclusion exactly. More like a listening. The night isn't something happening to you. It's something you're inside of, breathing with, adjusting to, sharing space with. And the sky above, changing as it is, isn't an enemy of sleep. It's a partner that's learned some new steps. For most of human history, people paid close attention to the night sky. A mainstream historical fact. Stars, winds, clouds, and seasonal air were once essential guides for navigation, agriculture, and daily rhythm. Sleep followed those cues naturally. When the sky shifted, people shifted with it. What we lost wasn't sensitivity, it was attention. And now attention is quietly returning. You feel it when the air changes, when nights don't cool the way they used to, when sleep feels lighter without a clear reason. These sensations aren't random. They're messages, not urgent ones, informational ones. Your body is listening to the atmosphere the way it always has, even if modern life taught you to ignore the conversation. Here's a quirky tidbit to tuck away. Some anthropologists believe early humans may have used sleep quality itself as a weather indicator. Lighter sleep preceding storms, deeper rest during stable conditions. Most historians still argue whether this interpretation is speculative or insightful, but it fits the pattern. Sleep has always been atmospheric feedback. Light joke moment, the last one, barely there. Your body is basically a weather station with opinions. Second, sleep reads the sky better than your phone app. Third, the atmosphere changed and your nervous system left a note. As you rest now, there's nothing left to analyze. The mechanisms, the debates, the chemistry, they've all done their work. What remains is experience. The feeling of being held by a night that isn't perfect but is familiar enough, safe enough. The atmosphere will keep changing. Nights will keep behaving differently. Some will be warmer, brighter, heavier, stranger, and still humans will sleep. Not because conditions are ideal, but because sleep is one of the most adaptable things we do. Historians still argue whether future generations will look back on this period as the moment humans relearned how deeply connected rest is to environment. Whether bedrooms became more thoughtful, whether cities softened at night, whether people stopped blaming themselves for sleep shaped by forces overhead. The argument will continue. You don't need to settle it tonight. Tonight is only about listening to your breath, to the quiet weight of the room, to the sense that even in change, there is continuity. You feel the mattress beneath you, solid, patient. You feel your chest rise and fall, steady enough. You feel the night, not perfect, but present. The sky above you is different than it used to be, and you are different too. More aware, more forgiving, more willing to rest without demanding certainty. Sleep doesn't ask you to solve the future. It asks you to release into the present, so you do. Thoughts stretch farther apart. Sensations blur at the edges. The atmosphere becomes background instead of subject. Whatever is changing up there will keep changing. Whatever is steady in you remains, and with that, you drift.